When I start people on any equipment, it's usually going to be machine first over free weight, which is not what most people do, because a lot of people, I think, are under the impression you need to start on a free weight movement to understand patterns before you start moving into a machine. But with a machine, you have a fixed bar path that's going to allow you to learn the movement in a fixed setting that you can't alter. So whereas with a barbell, I might be, all over the place like that. With this, it's pretty straightforward in that I only have one way I can move this. So I can only move this out in front of me as such. I can't take this and crank it up too high or too low or vary things. Now there's points where you want to do that, but that's not the point of this machine, right? Now, to start off with your setup, this is probably the press that most people are going to have access to. It's just a very standard flat press machine that doesn't do anything special. You'll see that when I move this forward, these arms are stiff. They do not move whatsoever. So in an ideal world, and hopefully you have access to it, you want a machine that converges. So you want a machine that's going to start back here, and then as it starts out wide, you're coming in close and your hands are converging, because at the end of the day, the action of the pec is not to press away from you. The action of the pec, if you just flex your pec, is to bring the arm across the midline of the body. That's all it is there for. So if you have a converging machine, we're able to more accurately and closely target the pec versus something that doesn't converge. Now that doesn't mean that you can't effectively get work on a machine like this, because we can. That's the point of me showing this machine. But it's more ideal if you can get a converging machine. So we'll check one of those out in a bit. But for now, starting on the most basic machine that most people have, that might be a little too high, but for this, it's good enough. So you want to take a grip that allows you to get a lot of depth, okay? Whatever width is comfortable for you there. And when you're setting up your back, you're going to be retracting the shoulder blades and pinching the back a little bit. It doesn't need to be this exaggerated thing where you're like way overarched, but you just want to have the shoulders back, your sternum and chest up. And an easy way to cue that movement through the entire upper body is to keep your chin tucked like you're trying to give yourself a double chin, and that sternum will rise, okay? Now, you don't necessarily want to start back here because you don't really have anywhere to go from that position. So you want to start in this position with the weight back, keep the chin tucked and keep that sternum high, and then kind of let yourself move forward until you notice your chest start to drop. When that chest and sternum starts to lower, you want to stop just before that, okay? Because that's what we want to avoid. We don't want the chest to drop and the sternum to drop into the movement, because then we're taking all of the activation off of the pec and we're moving it into the front delt, which is what we don't want. And that's what most people do on this movement, is they put it entirely on the front delt or on the shoulder in some way, which is of course not going to do anything for your fucking chest, okay? When it comes to setting up depth, we have the body positioned. Now, where do we go in depth? Do you want to come all the way back here? Do you want to start here? Do you want to start here? The answer is it's going to vary per person and vary on what you're able to do in terms of your flexibility when you're getting into these movements. So if you're someone who, let's say you come to here and your chest starts to round, you want to start from there because that's all the depth you can get. For me, I know that my depth is about here. Any further and I start to round down. But here, my sternum is still high and I have a good stretch on the pec, okay? So from this point, all you want to do is contract the pec and push away, okay? And you'll notice a few things when I'm going through this movement. First of all, my feet are locked. Doesn't matter if you can see them or not. But second of all, I'm moving my body back as I'm moving my hands away from me, okay? So we are contracting the pec and almost pushing ourselves away from the weight. Not necessarily just pushing the weight away from me, because you can see when I do that, if I'm pushing the weight just away from me, my delt starts to take over. And it's a little harder to see on this machine because of how wide it is. But if we focus here on just the pec as we're supposed to, and then we rock through and push the weight away, you'll notice that's all on the pec. You can see the contraction through the pec rather than being on the shoulder. Now, another thing to note is that a lot of people think that you just need to get this weight as far away from you as possible and lock those elbows out. Wrong idea. You'll see the same thing happen there with, even if I keep my sternum up, if I am just trying to extend the arms as much as possible, that elbow, if you pay attention to my elbow, rolls through and comes outside. Okay, I rotate outward on the elbow. which we want to avoid. You want to keep the elbow almost rotated inward to kind of scoop that pec and that press outward. And if you come all the way out and lock that elbow out, it's very hard to do without just engaging the shoulder and not involving, or sorry, without over engaging the shoulder and keeping the tension on the pec. What we want to do is stop where you feel that tension on the pec come off. For me, it's about here. Any further, and I'm not really getting a good contraction on the pec. It's taking it all into my shoulders and my elbows, okay? Especially on this machine. So you just want to rock through, return. Rock through, return. Rock through, return. And that's it. Now, with a machine like this, again, your grip isn't going to be ideal or set up in an ideal way. If you need to do a press and your only access is to a machine like this or dumbbells, barbell, I prefer to stay away from barbell, but dumbbell is a good option as well, because dumbbells, while there are other potential drawbacks to someone who's new, dumbbells will allow you to get that converging movement through the press versus a machine like this. So if you have to use this, the best way that I think you can set up for it is take the narrowest grip you can that allows you to still retract fully. For me, it's going to be this neutral grip, and then contract. That's it. Height setup here, it's really dependent on what you want to hit. You could raise this seat even more so that you're hitting more of a downward angle, kind of mimicking a decline bench. Totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You could also kind of do the same thing with vertical, where your elbows are a little further out. But the issue with that, and the one reason I would avoid that, is when you start to set yourself too low, a lot of people will bring the elbows out into a almost a direct angle like this, where they're coming back and pressing like that. And all that's doing is engaging the delt, because we're not able to actually engage the pec fibers from that angle and drive through properly. That's just all shoulder and tricep right there. But again, if we keep our hands a little bit more aligned and come back like that. Another thing you'll notice me doing here, and this is a smaller thing, I think it's probably the lower priority item on terms of setting up properly on this machine or any machine like it or any press in general. A lot of guys will just grab the bar with a death grip and they're going to do something like this. They're flexing their whole arm through the whole movement. They're gripping it, and you'll see that when I'm grabbing it, my hand is aligned so that there's no break in my wrist when I'm doing it this way. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. You can do the movement correctly like this, but it makes it a lot harder. Especially if we're trying to support this weight, you can honestly kind of limp wrist it, and you can see this isn't putting pressure on me. Now, the weight's quite low, obviously, but this isn't like hard for me to just support the weight on the palm of my hand. It's actually harder if I'm gripping like this, or even like that, because that weight is not stabilized as well as it should be anymore. When I'm pressing through the palm, you can see the weight is going to be stacked through my palm, wrist, and elbow when I am properly aligned. So you're just gonna let the weight rest on the meat of your palm there, kind of drive through right here, and then press through. That's it, simple as that. So the grip, again, is a minor thing to focus on. The biggest thing I would focus on here is making sure you're keeping the elbows slightly in so that you're not out here with them, or God forbid you're up here doing something completely fucking retarded. So you're down here, tucked, and pressing away, or you're rocking through and pushing your body away from the weight more than you are just trying to push the weight off of you. It's that simple. So for this one, this is probably the most commonly fucked up thing I see in this gym. I sit over there and I do my cardio, and every time I'm doing my cardio, I see someone over here doing this shit. Completely fucking stupid. All you're doing in this position is driving through the front delt. You don't want to touch that front delt through this movement at all, okay? Not if we're actually trying to work pec and chest here. So all you need to do to set up in this movement is the same thing we would do for any other press. Pressure on the palm, not over, because it's going to want to drive through the delt. You're gonna bias yourself towards wanting to drive through the delt and tricep with that kind of a grip to begin with. So keep that pressure on the palm of the hand, and then let yourself retract back and drive through. And you'll notice on a machine like this, we're able to converge, which is different from the one we did previously. So if you're coming through and converging, you can see that now my elbows are able to naturally fall in line with that line of convergence rather than being stuck out here. So we can get a little bit more of a contraction through this movement, but we want to focus the entire time on keeping the tension through the pec, not letting that front delt overpower the movement at all. You want to keep up in the sternum, tension through the pec. That's it, simple as that. And you should be comfortable in this portion of the movement. When you have the stretch on the pec here, you should be able to hold this. There should be no need for you to be back here and struggling. Obviously there's going to be intensity, it's going to be a little bit difficult at times, but we want you to be able to feel comfortable through the movement so that you can move through it naturally and engage the pec without engaging the delt. If you're back here and there's too much weight, you're going to find yourself tending to fall down and let that chest collapse, and you're going to be overpowering yourself with delt to press through. So keep the chin tucked, the sternum up, come back through the stretch, and drive through. That's it, simple as that. Now, you can also do flies on this machine. I prefer to set up on something else, but you can do a cable fly here if you don't want to do a press. It's ideal for both, and I do still like it for cable flies. I just prefer to have a fixed path on these because most people will fuck that up. So for your fly here, the principle is relatively the same. We'll show this on the pec deck here in a sec because that's what more people have most common access to, or dumbbells. But if you're doing a fly setup here, same principle where you're retracting through and then scooping the pec, okay? You're not focused on coming back here to the point where all that tension is gone and you're now caved in. You're gonna keep that chest up, you're gonna keep the sternum up, the chin tucked, and you're just going to drive through. And you're gonna drive through the pec. There's no engagement here through the tricep or the shoulder. You're just gonna rock through the pec. The goal here is not to bring your hands together. We don't care about bringing the hand together, it doesn't matter. The goal here is just to contract as much as you can through that pec until you can't go any further. For me, that's about here. My hands are never gonna touch because if I get to this point, guess what's happening? All front delt. My front delt is completely taken over because I'm now trying to drive through like this. So the same thing as we're doing in the presses, we're stretching, pushing through with the pec. That's it, simple as that. Rocking through. So super simple setup, nothing crazy there. It's not hard to set up for it. You just have to be aware of what you're actually trying to work. You can load this thing up maximally on the stack and crank out as many as you want. But if you're doing this and it's doing nothing for you because it's involving your front delt, you're not gonna actually see any pec growth from that. And if your goal is strength, okay, great. You can move the whole stack on a cable machine now. I don't really see the point in that, but you can do it. The goal, if you're bodybuilding, is obviously going to be to drive growth to the muscle. And that's what we're trying to do with a movement like this, is isolate and target that muscle. Naturally, you're gonna have some involvement from the front delt, from the tricep, all that kind of stuff, but you want to minimize that as much as possible on these movements so that we can focus on working the muscle we actually need to focus on working. Pretty simple stuff. Now, if you don't have one of these cable machines, and not that many people do, it's fairly common, or fairly uncommon machine, fairly common not to have it, then you're probably gonna have something like this, a pec deck. So for a movement like this, it's gonna be the same setup as you would have for the cable for fly. But again, as you're doing with every chest movement, instead of keeping the chest down and keeping yourself closed like this, chin back, sternum up to keep that chest elevated through the whole range of the movement. Shoulders pressed against the pad. And then all we're doing, it's a little loose, is coming forward and scooping the pec, okay? And in here, you'll see the same thing I'm doing. I'm not trying to bring my hands together. For me, personally, past this point, there's nothing more I'm getting from the pec. I'm just getting front delt here. But here, I'm just fully contracted at the pec. Nothing's happening in my shoulders, nothing's happening in my tricep. This is all engagement through the pec itself, okay? That's it. Simple as that. And when it comes to retracting on this movement, this one's not going very far back, but a lot of people will over retract to the point where they're coming back and they're letting that chest fall in, and all of the delt is becoming engaged in this stretched position. So when they're coming out of the bottom of the movement now, they're engaging the delt, and then they're not getting any pec movement until maybe they're here and then here. So you have this minimal range of pec activation if you're starting like that. So when you're coming back in this movement, only come back in the same thing you would do as a press. Only come back as far as you can keep your chest up, your chin back, and the activity and the activation on the pec, okay? That's it. This machine's also a little high for me, or a little low for me. It's a little high up here, so it doesn't work as well. But one thing to remember, if you're working the pec, you're probably gonna see it. Someone's gonna be able to tell your pec is actually working. It's so many times I see guys get on this thing and they're just cranking this weight like this and coming in like this, and you can tell all of their delt is firing, none of their pec is firing. There's no activation through the pec at all, or very minimal, again, through this very shortened range, and that's not what we want. What we're trying to do here is keep all the activation on the pec all the time. That's it.